She was 36 years old, dying of cancer, and had one final request: bury me next to my father. She never met him, never received a letter from him, couldn't even see a portrait of him until she was 20. He was Lord Byron, the most famous poet in England, and he walked out of her life when she was 5 weeks old. Her mother tried to stamp out the poet out of her. It didn't work, because the girl who was forbidden from poetry went on to imagine the computer a century before anyone built one. Her father was Lord Byron, celebrated, scandalous, and gone. He left England when Ada was barely a month old, died in Greece when she was 8. She never met him. And her mother, Lady Byron, she was terrified of one thing: that Ada would inherit his madness. Byron was volatile, reckless, drowning in scandal. So Lady Byron did the only thing she knew how to do. She tried to stamp out the poet out of her daughter. From the age of 4, Ada was drilled in mathematics and science, disciplines her mother considered antidotes to creative instability. She was forced to lie perfectly still for hours as training in self control. Any spark of imagination was treated as evidence of inherited insanity. For 20 years, no portrait of Byron was allowed in the house. Ada grew up knowing she was the daughter of England's most famous poet, hearing the whispers, carrying the name, but she couldn't put a face to the ghost. But to understand what Ada built, you have to understand what she survived first. At 12, Ada decided she was going to fly. Not as a metaphor, she literally wanted to build wings. She studied bird anatomy. She tested materials: paper, oil silk, wire, feathers. She calculated the relationship between body weight and wing surface area. She wrote it all up in careful notes and called the project Flyology. Her plan was to build a steam-powered flying horse. She was 12. Then measles hit. She was 13, and the disease paralyzed her legs. For nearly a year, she was confined to bed, watched constantly by a mother who was scanning her for signs of madness. And here's what gets me about Ada: she didn't stop. Lying flat on her back, unable to move, she kept studying, kept designing, kept imagining machines that didn't exist yet. By 1831, she could walk again, but only with crutches. A child who couldn't walk, living in her father's invisible shadow, was designing flying machines in her head. That's who Ada Lovelace was before she became Ada Lovelace. Ada's mathematical abilities were obvious to anyone who taught her. Her tutor, Augustus de Morgan, told her mother that Ada had the potential to become a first-rate mathematician mind. But it was another mentor who changed everything. Mary Somerville, one of the first women admitted to the Royal Astronomical Society, became Ada's tutor and her window into the scientific world. And on June 5th, 1883, Somerville took 17-year-old Ada to a party. Charles Babbage was there. Babbage had been building something called the difference engine, a mathematical calculator of terrifying complexity. And that night, he demonstrated a working piece of it. While most guests stared at the machine the way you'd stare at a magic trick you couldn't explain, Ada understood it. She saw the beauty of it. Here's where it gets interesting. Babbage was designing a new machine, the analytical engine, steam-powered, programmed with punch cards borrowed from textile looms. Everyone who heard about it understood it as a very advanced calculator. But Ada looked at the same machine and saw something completely different. She saw that a device following logical rules, operating on symbols, could do anything that could be formally described: music, images, language. She was 17 years old, and she was describing what we now call general purpose computing. Babbage called her the enchantress of numbers. In 1842, an Italian engineer named Luigi Menabrea published an article describing Babbage's analytical engine. Ada was asked to translate it from French to English, and Babbage suggested that she add her own notes. But she didn't just add notes. Over 9 months, with 3 children under the age of 8, she produced 65 pages of original work. Her notes were 3 times longer than the article she was translating. She signed the whole thing AAL, not her name, just initials, because a woman could incredibly claim work like this in the scientific press of 1843. She wrote to Babbage during this period, "I am working very hard for you, like the devil in fact," which perhaps I am. And buried in those 65 pages, in an appendix she labeled Note G, was something the world wouldn't fully understand for over a century. A step-by-step procedure for computing Bernoulli numbers, loops, variables, conditional logic. It was, by modern consensus, the world's first computer program. But Note G wasn't even her biggest idea. What she wrote next is the part that hit me. In her notes, Ada wrote that the analytical engine might compose elaborate and scientific pieces of music of any degree of complexity or extent. Let that land for a second. This was 1843. She was describing a machine that could compose music, generate patterns, manipulate any symbol, not just numbers. She was describing, in a document signed with initials, what we now call generative AI, a century before the first computer was built. She called herself an analyst and metaphysician, not a mathematician, something stranger. She wanted to understand what it means for a process to be computable and what that implies about the nature of the mind itself. She once asked her mother, "If you can't give me poetry, can't you give me poetical science?" That's who she was, the person who refused to accept that imagination and logic lived in separate rooms. And here's what people miss about this period. Ada published her notes, the world said, "That's nice," and moved on. She proposed to Babbage that she manage the funding and construction of the analytical engine, but he refused. He wouldn't give up control. Their working partnership was over. Ada had a vision and nowhere to put it. And what came next was harder. With no outlet for her ambitions, Ada turned to gambling. She lost thousands of pounds on the horses and secretly pawned off the family diamonds. All the while dreaming of building what she called the calculus of the nervous system, a mathematical model of how the brain generates thought, but she never got to pursue it. And this is the part that changed how I see the whole story. She wasn't falling apart. She was a person whose vision had outrun everything available to her. The world didn't have a container for what she could see. In August 1852, Ada was dying of cancer. She was 36, and her mother had taken control of the household, excluding her friends. At Ada's request, Charles Dickens came to visit and read her the death scene of a child from his novel Dombey and Son. She wrote, "I begin to understand death, which is going on quietly and gradually every minute, and will never be a thing of one particular moment." And she made a confession to her husband near the end. We don't know what she told him, but whatever it was, he left her bedside and didn't come back. She held on for months longer than any doctor predicted. Ada Lovelace's mind had outrun everything around it. Apparently, it outran death too. But on November 27th, 1852, Ada Lovelace died. She was 36, her father's age. But her notes were published and then, for over a century, essentially forgotten. The engineers who built the first real computers in the 1940s didn't know about her. They rediscovered the same territory independently. The digital revolution happened without Ada Lovelace. Then, in 1950, Alan Turing published one of the foundational papers of artificial intelligence. In it, he coined the term "lady loves a subjection" to describe her argument that machines can't originate anything, and he used her idea as a starting point. And in 1953, her notes were republished for the first time. Computer scientists reading them in the dawn of the digital age realized that she's already been there. And in 1980, the United States Department of Defense named a programming language Ada. Think about what that means. The world she described finally built the machines she'd imagined without knowing she'd already mapped it all out over a century earlier. So come back with me to that churchyard in Nottinghamshire. November 1852. Ada was being lowered beside Lord Byron. Now you know what that moment means. She's choosing to lie beside the imagination she was forbidden, the poetry her mother tried to stamp out, the father she spent her whole life searching for. She died at 36 thinking she'd failed, but the machines that run your world are her legacy. Every time AI composes music, writes a sentence, or generates an image, that's Ada's prediction landing over 180 years later. And the question she left open, whether a machine can truly generate anything on its own, well, we're still trying to answer it. If you can't give me poetry, can't you give me poetical science? Well, she got both. She just had to invent the second one herself. If the story changed how you see AI, hit subscribe. We've got more coming.